أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين وعلى آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين. I begin in the name of Allah, most compassionate, most merciful. All praise be to Allah, Lord of the universe, and may the peace and blessings be upon the noblest of prophets and messengers, and upon his family, the good, the pure. Dear brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It is indeed a great pleasure for me to be here amongst all of you, your warm and friendly faces that constantly draws me back here, and for giving me this opportunity to remember and share some thoughts, in fact to exchange thoughts on the life and legacy of Sayyid al-Shaheed Muhammad Baqir al Sadr and his virtuous sister al-Shaheeda al Sadr bint al-Huda. Now, inshallah, the key operative word here is to exchange, because their well was so deep that I can only draw little from it, and in the limited time that we have, I can only share so much. So it's just a salient feature that have stood out for me, and perhaps inshallah we can hear from everyone as to some of their thoughts and contributions that have stood up for you. Now, many of us already are familiar with their biographical sketch, so I won't go into the details of their personal histories. Those of you who don't know them, I encourage you to get to know them, because they are remarkable and influential figures who have contributed, both in thought and action, towards reforming society, and their contributions have permeated throughout the region and, in fact, the world. And so, it's important for us to remember them, not just as iconic figures whose posters adorn our walls, whether they be physical or virtual walls, but for us to delve into their concerns and into their objectives. And so inshallah, this is what I hope to share with you today. So I'd like to begin, before I actually continue, with the verse of the Quran which is appropriate for such figures, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, وَلَا تَحْسَبَنَّ الَّذِينَ قُتِلُوا فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ أَمْوَاتًا بَلْ أَحْيَاءٌ عِنْدَ رَبِّهِمْ يُرْزَقُونَ. Do not suppose those who are slain in the way of Allah to be dead. Nay, they are alive with their Lord, seeking sustenance, or Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is providing sustenance for them. So when we look at the life of Sayyid al-Shaheed al Sadr, and we analyze what is his principal concern, we find that his concern was for the individual and for society to strive for the highest ideal, the absolute ideal, which is none other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and for the ideal way of life, that is Islam, to be the guiding principle of humanity. And so he gave life to the ummah, and they gave life to the ummah, even at the cost of their own. But then again, that's the path of the prophets, that's the path of the infallibles. And you know what? Luminous gems that we lost. I mean, it's just quite incredible in terms of the sheer loss that the ummah, of the ummah, when their lives were cut short prematurely at their prime. I mean, can you imagine losing a child prodigy who at the age of 11 was studying and teaching and refuting philosophical ideas, whom it is said had never made taqleed in his life, because by the time that he was baligh, he was a mujtahid himself, whom at an age younger than my own, in his mid-20s, he wrote internationally acclaimed works of our philosophy, and our economy that influenced not just thinkers but nations, in terms of the adoption of their ideas, towards their setup. For instance, his work on Islamic banking system was instrumental in establishing the banking system of Kuwait, and even in the Gulf region, as to how they would deal with their oil wealth. His political thoughts shaped constitutions, and he literally wrote the textbook on Islamic jurisprudence that's used in the hawzas today. He had such a rich insight into a vast array of fields, whether it be Quran or Hadith, jurisprudence or theology, logic or philosophy, history or politics, economics or sociology, psychology, governance, culture. And in all of these fields, he was able to contribute immensely. What an incredible mind. What a beautiful mind. And what a consistent mind as well, whereby he took the higher principles, the foundational principles, and he applied it to all fields. It's important for us to read his works. It's important for us, and many of them are translated into English and are available readily on the internet. And at the same time, he was radiant and approachable, always with a smile on his face. Have you seen his pictures? He's always smiling in them. And yet, this was the man who was the greatest threat to the tyrants. And he had such a great character and high personality that, even those whom he thoroughly refuted and critiqued, whether it be Marx or Descartes or Locke or Kant or Hume or Freud, he would cordially refer to them as intelligent people. He was very respectful, whom he strongly differed with. So he disagreed without being disagreeable. And this is the mark of a great intellect, whereby those who are ignorant and those who have a weak argument basically resolve towards character assassination and vilification. He didn't vilify the person, he critiqued the idea. And you found himself to be the subject of vilification, both amongst his own people and others as well. And he was courageous. He was courageous in his thoughts. He was courageous in his words. He was courageous in his actions. And for this, he was harassed, he was maligned, he was arrested, he was tortured, and ultimately paid the ultimate price with his execution. We find that even if you want to have a very quick sample of this great courage of his, in terms of his stance against oppression, have a look at some of his last messages, which were smuggled from when he was under house arrest. He looked the dictator eye to eye, in his words and in person. And in one of these messages he says, "I know that these demands will cost me my life. But these are not the demands of an individual, they are demands of a nation." And such was the person of Sayyid al-Shaheed. Not just also in action or words, but he was very courageous in his thoughts too, and where he went beyond established status quo and had an independence of mind. And so we also find, for instance, where the Quran describes individuals, the believers who are stern with those who cover the truth, but compassionate amongst themselves. And he was so compassionate amongst the believers. To the nation, he affectionately addressed it. And again, these are statements coming from his last speech, where he addresses it, "O my sons, O the sons of Abu Bakr and Omar, O the sons of Ali and Hussein, O my brothers and sons who are Shia and Sunni, Arab and Kurd, And he addressed them with such affection, without any sectarian or discriminatory outlook. So, let us immerse ourselves tonight in sampling his thoughts, and particularly pertaining to his core objective. What was his core mission? What was his core theme and objective? His main objective was for humankind to fulfill their destiny as the Khala'if of Allah, as the trustees of God, as the stewards of God, as the vicegerents of God, whom we find in the verses of the Quran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "Inni ja'ilun fil ardi khalifa." I am establishing on the earth a trustee, a steward, a vicegerent. Here in this verse, Khalifa is in singular form, referring to Adam, the prototypical human being. But also, we find that the Quran refers to Khalifa in the plural form, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَجَعَلْنَاكُمْ خَلَائِفَ الْأَرْضِ, and we have made you, plural, the vicegerents, the trustees, the stewards on earth. And so this is the destiny of humankind. But Sayyid al-Shaheed also recognized that a key obstacle on that path of fulfilling that mission is the distraction by the attraction to the world. So, and when he analyzes this, he traces this key conflict to the creational schema, the creational schema of human beings, whereby on the one hand human beings have the element of being made from earth, and on the other hand they have this divine spark. And he refers to the Quran, whereby Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ مِنْ صَلْصَالٍ مِنْ حَمَّاءٍ مَسْنُونٍ. Certainly we have created man from a dry clay of aging mud. So man being created from earth. But 3 verses later, and this is almost right, sequentially, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَنَفَخْتُ فِيهِ مِنْ رُوحِي, and I have breathed into him of my spirit. And so, we find that human beings are a combination of these 2 things. And I'm quoting the Sayyid where he says that, in terms of the human beings, his clay origin draws him to the earth and calls him to base desires, material tendencies, and all that is low, vile, and becoming of the earth. At the same time, the spark of the divine spirit breathed into him calls him to high and noble qualities, and lifts him so much so that he comes near to the divine qualities and adopts them. Divine spirit invites him to Allah's endless knowledge, His endless power, His endless justice, His endless generosity and magnanimity and retribution, and His other attributes and qualities. And we see this, for instance, in the life of Imam Ali alayhi salam, how he completely annihilated himself in the servitude of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, such that he became the hand through which Allah operated, the eyes through which Allah saw. So this is the potentiality of human beings. And so in terms of these elemental tendencies between the earthly and divine, he says that there's a conflict, the pure. Dear brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It is indeed a great pleasure for me to be here amongst all of you, your warm and friendly faces that constantly draws me back here, and for giving me this opportunity to remember and share some thoughts, in fact to exchange thoughts on the life and legacy, both in thought and action, towards reforming society, and their contributions have permeated throughout the region and in fact the world. And so it's important for us to remember them, not just as iconic figures whose posters adorn our walls, whether they be physical or virtual walls, but for us to delve into their concerns and into their objectives. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين وعلى آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين. I begin in the name of Allah, most compassionate, most merciful. All praise be to Allah, Lord of the universe, and may the peace and blessings be upon the noblest of prophets and messengers, and upon his family, the good of Sayyid al-Shaheed, Muhammad Baqir al Sadr, and his virtuous sister, al-Shaheeda, al Sadr bint al-Huda. Now, inshallah, the key operative word here is to exchange, because their well was so deep that I can only draw little from it, and in the limited time that we have, I can only share only so much. So it's just a salient feature that have stood out for me, and perhaps inshallah we can hear from everyone as to some of their thoughts and contributions that have stood up for you. Now, many of us already are familiar with their biographical sketch, so I won't go into the details of their personal histories. Those of you who don't know them, I encourage you to get to know them, because they are remarkable and influential figures who have contributed